to the Negotiators interview series. I am Patricia Fripp, executive speech coach and Hall of Fame keynote speaker living in San Francisco, although I come from Wimborne, Dorset. And this episode, we are turning the tables. Normally, top negotiating expert Derek Arden interviews his guests. This week, I'm interviewing him. Now, he's probably too modest to tell you that according to the very prestigious Professional Speaking Association in England, he was voted the #1 professional speaker in the areas of negotiations. He has taught negotiations in 27 different countries, and he has written 9 books. He also had a great career working in the banking industry. So Derek, welcome to your own show.
Thank you, Patricia. How kind of you. And thank you for doing this all the way from San Francisco. What a privilege and an honor it is for me.
Now, my first question is, at what point in your career did you realize I know how to negotiate the way my colleagues don't?
Ah, well, that's a great question. The time I realized that was about 2 years after I got thrown out of a multinational retailer in the UK for not reducing my price on a £1 million contract. And that night I went out and bought a couple of books on negotiation. I ordered some tapes and some CDs. It was tapes in those days. And I listened to them in my car going to the station. And suddenly I had the penny dropped and I realized that I really didn't operate in the right league for negotiation. I was operating in a much lower league, and I was negotiating with professionals who knew much more than I knew. It was that sort of unconscious incompetence that I had at that point. And so I listened to the tapes and the CDs. I read every book I could get my hands on. I went on seminars, and then I realized that I did know more than my boss and my boss's boss, but I couldn't tell them that. So negotiating upwards, of course, I was making them smart, saying things like, hey, boss, do you think we should do this? Let's take a time out in the middle of the meeting. Let's take a break. Let's prepare properly with a flip chart. Let's make sure we debrief every negotiations. And of course, I did it in a soft way that helped their skills. So I was making them look smart, which is a key issue in negotiations, isn't it? To make your boss look smart, and then you can negotiate your fee, your salary, or even your bonus for doing that. And then I went on to teach at a business school a couple of afternoons a year, which was great. And the more you speak, the more you learn, as we all know, and we teach to other people. And I got better and better and better at it. And I got in some pretty tough, difficult negotiations, but I knew what was going on. The real issue is that a lot of people don't even know that psychological negotiating tactics are being played on people. They're not watching the body language for the truth, etc., etc. So that was the real wake-up moment for me, a wow moment.
All right. Well, let's imagine everyone who is listening is probably asking the same question, which is, all right, imagine we have an even playing field. And so if you are as smart as the other person, what are some of the techniques you know? Then I want you to give us some advice on, well, when it's obvious, as you realized, what happens when they know more than I do? So best techniques, we want to have a competitive edge.
Okay, I'm going to walk you through the 12 steps in my negotiating system, which is in my latest book, Win-Win, how to get a winning result from persuasive negotiations. So I think that's the best way to do it. It's in order, in a structured order. It starts off with preparation and it finishes with you'll have a lot more confidence to negotiate if you've gone through this structured process. So number 1 is preparation. Proper preparation prevents pretty poor performance, and really understanding the client, where they're coming from, how they've negotiated before. Have a look at their website, have a look at some of the key players on LinkedIn, the people that you're going to negotiate with. Get the whole picture, and then do a brainstorm about where do we think they're coming from, where are we coming from, what's the best position, target position, walk away position that we've got, and if we do walk away, what's the alternative position, called a BATNA in America often, best alternative to a negotiated position. So look at that, work that out, structure an agenda, put the difficult items further down the agenda, perhaps send it to the client in advance, ask them if they want to put anything on it. And that's a little secret tip for people, because we don't want them raising things in the middle of the meeting that we hadn't thought about. So we want them to give them the opportunity to put it on the agenda, because if they don't put it on the agenda, then clearly we can say to them, you need to be, we don't know about that, can we park that to one side. Think about where you negotiate, on their premises, on our premises, on neutral ground, where you sit around the table. Sitting across the table is confrontational, sitting around the table, and see how much of that you can get towards win-win. If they don't want to do some of that, then you know it's going to be a pretty aggressive negotiation, and therefore that puts you on your guard as well. Number 2 is first impressions. First impressions are really crucial. How are you going to greet them? As I said, where you're going to sit, how's your handshake? Are you going to be smiling? Are you going to set it up for a win-win and then see what they're doing? As we always say, Patricia, on our presenting and pitching and networking, you don't get a second chance to make a first impression, so make sure you get that right. Number 3 is asking good questions, high quality questions. The quality of the question you ask determines the quality of the answer that you get, and generally quality questions when you're negotiating start with how or what. They're open questions, and so how much can you pay? What have you got in your budget? What are the key issues for you? What are the deal breakers here? So asking those questions, and then the next trick, as we know, is to shut up, button it, zip your lips, and listen really carefully with the 4 bits that we were given to listen with: 2 ears and 2 eyes, of course, because we want to listen to the body language as well. Number 5 in the book, I had a job negotiating this in with Pearson, the publishers, and the editor, Eloise Cook. And that's about using your head, using some brainstorming techniques, mind mapping to get all the information down on a piece of paper, speed reading, which is really important in this day and age with the volume of information that we need to read, and getting yourself in the right frame of mind, getting yourself into a negotiator's frame of mind, negotiator's state, and all those, that type of thing. Number 6 is body language, reading body language, because it's said to be 5 times more difficult to lie, tell fibs with body language than it is with the words. So we want to see if there's some signals when we ask these difficult questions, like, oh, it's really good to be here with you, and there's any of that nose rubbing, fidgeting, or whatever that's more difficult to see on the camera. But never forget, Pinocchio's nose grew every time he told a lie. So there's probably something in this, and you'll never see a top politician doing anything like that. Number 7 is actually lying, a little bit on lying, a bit about what the psychologists have proven when people aren't telling the truth. For example, the police will listen to an audio version of something back on a criminal rather than watching the video as well, because they're more likely to notice that the voice slows down, there's more ums and ahs, etc., and then somebody else will get a better feel than the person that's been in the room with the criminal or whatever. Number 8 is negotiating tactics and strategies. I've written about 30 of them. I'll tell you about the first 5 on here, my favorites. Higher authority linked to good guy, bad guy, good cop, bad cop. I'd love to do this for you, Patricia, because we're great friends, etc. But I'm never going to get that through my board of directors at that price. So what can you do to help me smooth it through? I need a bit more fat on the bone or whatever. So again, you don't want conflict with the client yourself, but you want to use the higher authority. Average negotiators think it's a weakness to use higher authority. Professional negotiators know that you always use it to keep the other side fair. Number 3 is time. 80% of concessions come in the last 20% of the negotiation time. So it's better for you control the time than let other people do that. It's Pareto's law, the 80-20 rule, etc. It seems to work in most parts of business, what we do. I remember those Northern Ireland negotiations, the famous Good Friday negotiations, where the Americans and the Brits, Tony Blair was persuaded by Bill Clinton to put a deadline on the Northern Ireland negotiations, or there wouldn't be any more joint aid for Northern Ireland, and it worked. I never thought it would work, but Easter Sunday they signed the contract 2 years later, and we've had a bit of peace in Northern Ireland compared with what we had before. So that was a great move and a great tactics. Taking a time out is my 4th tip on when you're in a negotiation as a tactic. Take a break, think things through, get the emotions out of the negotiations, talk to your colleague that you brought with you, see what they saw, heard, because different people hear different things in a meeting, and particularly when you're the lead negotiator and you are under pressure, under stress, your blood pressure's up a bit, your adrenaline's flowing, you can't hear what other people are saying, what they're really saying, what they're not saying between the lines. Number 5 is flinching when they put the price on the table or whatever. Say something like, that's a bit more than I was expecting to pay, or whatever. People are surprised when I teach that. I was teaching a masterclass yesterday, and they go, I'm getting them to practice, go, just a deep intake of breath, etc. And the last one I would mention is the dumb is smart tactic, or as I call the Columbo Tactic, from the famous actor from your part of the world, Peter Falk, who sadly died a few years ago, but can't quite get my brain around what you're saying, or just one more thing when you think people have been spinning it. Number 9's influencing skills, from the work of Robert Cialdini, that I always think people have got to put in the 6 traits of influence. Number 1, does the person like you or not? Number 2, reciprocity. Number 3, authority. Number 4, social proof. Number 5, scarcity. And number 6, commitment and consistency. That's all covered in my book, and I don't think we've got time for me to go into that, but perhaps we can go into that another time if I'm privileged enough for you to interview me. Number 10 is bargaining skills, the actual haggling process, which some people think is the negotiation process. Of course, it's not. It's a much bigger thing than that. Making concessions conditional. If I do this for you, what will you do for me? Or if we do this for you, what will you do for us? It's better to use we, really, the royal we, the company we, rather than myself. And make sure you can always come down in price, but you can rarely go up if you start too low. So start high and come down. Number 11 is conflict. There's always going to be conflict in negotiations, and a lot of people I teach don't actually focus on that. They know there's conflict, but they haven't thought through that people are going to create some definite conflict. And at the end of the day, if I got something that you want and I want to sell it to you and we can't agree on price, we're going to have a bit of conflict there, compared with the big, massive negotiations that we see around the world where there's terrific conflict. And if you do all those things, then your confidence is going to be a lot better, and you're going to go into the negotiations feeling good, feeling prepared, feeling that you've covered most things that people are going to throw at you. You can never in a negotiation cover everything. There's always going to be a curveball comes at you, but you're going to be better prepared to deal with it if you do that. So that's my 12 steps of negotiating, or 12 steps of successful negotiating. And it works, I can tell you that.
Good. And obviously we need your book. However, if you are suddenly, second part of this, suddenly you're in a situation and you realize you are out of your league, just as you did early in your career. Now that there is more information, people like you are writing books and have podcasts and video interviews, what would be the first recommendation if you suddenly realize I am out of my league?
Well, you know what I'm going to say here, and I can't resist it. You've got to get my book on Amazon straight away, delivered first.
Before you even get in the next one to be outclassed. All right, good.
But you could get it on Kindle straight away, that minute. But you really do need to. Let me just say this. I think that this is the number one skill that can increase people's profits, their cash flow, their return on investment that they don't consider. They put all their hard work in, and then if they get out negotiated by £10,000, $10,000, 10,000 euros, that is bottom line profit that's going out of their company, out of their business, that they are losing. So this is not an optional soft skill, as some HR departments say. This is a bottom line, rock hard skill that anybody in business must have.
All right. My concluding question. There are sleazy techniques that you probably don't recommend people use, but you probably recommend you have to be aware of them for when people use them on you.
Yes, you do. Absolutely.
Okay. So what is a sleazy technique for us to recommend, that we need to recognize?
There's a number of them, and I cover them in Win-Win, and I call them dirty tactics. Yeah. And dirty tactics are ones that step over the line. Lying, absolutely not telling the truth is the first thing, which is why you've got to do lots of preparation so you've got a real handle on it. Not letting people take a break, arranging for a meeting late at night and saying that's the only time you could do it. I must tell you a very quick story if we've got time. We went to a meeting in Paris, and they wouldn't see us till 5:30 in the evening. The client we were negotiating with, this was a 10 million euro transaction. So there's a lot of money at stake, and they didn't see us till 6:20. They had assumed that we were going to catch the last plane back to London. And when it got to 8 o'clock, they slowed all the meeting down. Sometimes they talked in French, etc., because they didn't think the Brits would understand French. When it got to 8 o'clock, they said, well, here's our final offer. You need to get back, take it or leave it, etc. And we said, no, we don't need to get back. We're booked in the hotel around the corner. We can stay all night. And at that point, their chief negotiator went pale. And I thought, we've really upset him here or something. And he said, well, I have to leave because it's my wife's birthday and I've got to take her out to dinner. And clearly, I don't think he was having the best matrimonial situation from the way he was looking and the way it was. So it wasn't negotiable from his point. And the other thing that happened in the negotiation, we took in a French speaker, and we didn't tell them we'd taken in a French speaker because we knew they were going to play dirty tactics on us. And we took a break, we took a time out, and then our French speaker translated what they said. And the other thing they said was, when you take your break, we've set up a meeting room for you to make your calls back to HQ. And I heard the word set up. Yeah, I bet we've been set up. And I'm 100% sure that room was probably bugged, or 80% sure. And they were going to listen into the conversations to hear what we were getting agreed by HQ to try and do this, settle this 10 million euro. So that was a fascinating one, and I took that back and I analysed it and I put it into all my learnings, and so there were about 4 or 5 tactics there. But when you smell a rat, there usually is a rat. Trust your gut. Once things are a bit fishy, they probably are a bit fishy.
Well, good. Well, Derek Arden, I hope you've enjoyed having the tables turned, being the interviewee. So we hope you have enjoyed this episode of the Negotiators interview series.
Thank you, Patricia.